we're one of those lucky people that can travel anywhere.
Yes, ma'am, I know.
And they sometimes call you nomads.
My husband worked at the USG mine in Empire. I was a substitute teacher. Welcome to Badlands Spa.
What the nomads are doing is not that different than what the pioneers did.
Hey, bird!
I maybe spent too much of my life just remembering.
I'll see you again.
A woman named Fern lost her job after the gypsum board factory in their town closed down. She decided to sell most of her possessions and use the proceeds to buy a van. Fern hugged her old friend goodbye and set off on her journey. She hopes to find work somewhere else. At night, Fern stopped at a hotel, saying that the company Amazon was supposed to have reserved a room for her. However, she still decided to spend the night in the van. Soon Fern got a job at an Amazon sorting center. During the break, she got to know her colleagues. Fern still lives in her van, so she has to wash her clothes at the laundromat. Later, she complained to her new friend Linda that the previous owner of the van slept right on the floor, so there isn't even a bed here. The most valuable things that remind her of loved ones, the woman took with her. She named her van the Fortress. Later, in the store, an old acquaintance with her children met Fern. Learning that she still lives in a van, the woman offered to let her stay with them, but Fern said it was okay. The woman settled into her mobile home and decorated it for Christmas. That evening, Linda told her that in 2008, she lost her job and wanted to leave this life voluntarily. But what stopped her was that there would be no one to take care of her pets. At the time Linda was almost 62, she had already raised 2 daughters. Like Fern, Linda decided to live in a van because it is cheaper and allows to travel. On the internet, Fern learned about a camp for aspiring nomads founded by Robert. He built the camp right on public land in Arizona. Linda suggested her go there together, but Fern doubts it's a good idea. During the day, she still works at the sorting center, and the rest of the time is spent in the van. Fern has less than a week left to work, so she'll have to look for a new job. A center employee advised her to head south because there's hardly any work in this state. But Fern wants to try again. At the employment office, the woman explained that the factory where she worked had closed down. Her husband was a miner. The social worker said that unfortunately, it is very difficult to find a job for the elderly. It has gotten colder outside. Rachel, the gas station manager next to which Fern's van is parked, advised her to go to a church where homeless people are provided with shelter, but Fern assured her that everything was fine. At night, the woman couldn't fall asleep due to the cold, but the next day she continued her journey, heading south to the very same nomad camp. Here she met Linda, who was very happy to see her. Bob, the founder of the camp, explained that he decided to unite people who were left without a home so they could take care of each other. In the evening around the campfire, Fern met several people. One man was a Vietnam veteran who suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. He left his home to get away from the hustle. One of the women lost her parents and began her healing journey 2.5 years ago. Each of these people has their own unique story. It turned out that Fern had lost her husband. Bob assured her that after she connects with nature, her life will change completely. A road is exactly where any person can find peace. Following Bob's advice, Fern decided to stay here after all. Bob introduces people to life hacks for travelers who lead a strictly nomadic lifestyle. One day Fern met Dave. They had a nice conversation, after which Fern and her friends went to the van exhibition. There were many great options, but these vans are likely very expensive. In the evening, people at the campfire sang, then had a disco and had a fun time. Dave invited Fern to dance. She was embarrassed but agreed. Fern tidies up her van. In the camp, she learns the basic principles of self-sufficiency and survival on the road. Once during a trip, her tire went flat. She turned to a woman named Swanky for help, who accused her of recklessness. According to Swanky, it is impossible to travel in the desert without spare tires and essential items. Swanky helped Fern change the tire and advised her to repaint the van. However, Fern doesn't understand why this is necessary. Swanky has a lot of things, so she posted a post on Facebook to give away everything unnecessary. At one point Swanky felt sick. Fern helped her sit down and brought her water. The woman was getting worse. It turned out that Swanky had cancer, and she had 7 to 8 months to live. The woman wants to make it to Alaska, which has many memories for her. Soon Swanky will be 75 years old, and she believes she has had a good life. In the evening, the women admired the sunset, and the next day Swanky was giving away her things. At the night, Fern looked at memorable photos. She missed her husband very much. One day Fern told Swanky that her husband had spent his last few months in the hospital. He was gravely ill, there was nothing the doctors could do. Soon Swanky left, and Fern stayed at the camp, enjoying nature and feeling a sense of peace in her soul. She continued her journey. Fern uses the public restroom to wash and tidy herself. Eventually, she landed a job as a campsite administrator at Cedar Pass in the national park, where she met Dave again. Fern and Linda cleaned up the campsite and met new people, some of whom were traveling with their families. The women found pleasure in everyday things. One day they went on a tour that Dave was leading. It was a very beautiful place, as if frozen in time. In the evening, the friends drank at the bar and discussed various topics. Soon Fern said goodbye to Linda, with whom she had become close friends. The woman intended to continue her journey, as every nomad did sooner or later. Dave tried to persuade Fern to quit smoking, but she said she didn't see the point. Ants had infested her van, so she was sorting through her belongings. Dave volunteered to help her and accidentally broke a tea set that Fern's father had given her, which was very important to her. Of course, Fern was upset. At night, she tried to glue the shards back together, and during the day she worked as usual. One day Dave felt very unwell. Fern took care of him and then drove to the hospital, where he had surgery. It turned out that Dave had a flare-up of ulcerative colitis. While visiting her friend in the hospital, Fern talked about her plans to someday go to Nebraska. When Dave recovered, he and Fern got a job at a diner in South Dakota. Fern spent more and more time with Dave, getting new impressions of life. Nature helps both of them cope with their mental traumas. At night, the friends along with other travelers looked at the sky through a telescope. Fern found it amazing that the light from many stars that had died millions of years ago had only just reached Earth. Once, an adult son of Dave, Peter, came to the diner, looking for his father everywhere. It turned out that in the past, Dave had been an alcoholic. During this time, Peter had a son. Dave admitted to Fern that he wanted to be with his family, but he was afraid to go back to his old habits. Fern advised him to return to those who were dear to him. Dave suggested that Fern go with him, but she refused. Before leaving, Dave left a note with his address so she could visit him. Fern's life continued as usual. After some time, she moved to a new place and got a job at a sugar beet processing plant. Sometimes Fern feels lonely. One day she received a message from Swanky, who has been spending the last months of her life alone with nature. The moment Fern had feared so much had arrived. Her van broke down, and the repair was very expensive. The mechanic at the car service said it would be easier to buy a new van, but Fern couldn't afford it.
I live in there.
Fern had no choice but to call her sister Dolly and ask for money. She took a bus to California and arrived at her sister's house. Fern, Dolly, and her friends had a picnic. Everyone discussed idle topics that Fern was no longer interested in. It seemed strange to her that all these people were investing all their savings in real estate, settling in one place. In the evening, Dolly gave her sister an envelope with money and offered to move in with her, but Fern said she had gotten used to her current lifestyle. The next morning, saying goodbye to Dolly, Fern left. Once, she saw the guy by the campfire whom she had met before in the national park. He told her about his girlfriend, to whom he constantly writes letters. Fern remembered the words of her wedding vow to the husband. That night, she looked at old photos, indulging in nostalgia. Fern continues her journey. On the way, she decided to visit Dave, who was very happy to see her. Dave had a large and friendly family. Fern was accommodated in a separate room. Dave babysits his grandson and says he has decided to quit the nomadic life and stay with his family. Dave confessed his feelings to Fern and offered her to stay here forever. They have a guest house where Fern could live. According to Dave, his family doesn't mind at all. At first Fern agreed and was helping the family on the farm. They had a large household, so there was a lot of work to be done. In the evening, the whole family gathered around the table and had dinner. Dave made a toast in honor of Fern. Everyone was glad that she decided to stay. Later, Fern told Peter's wife that she couldn't stay in that town after the husband's demise. Besides, she lost her job, like hundreds of other people. Fern is trying to adjust to her new way of life. Now she has a roof over her head and people who support her. At the night, Fern couldn't sleep and went to her van. Now it is the only place where she feels truly comfortable. Fern doubts whether she made the right decision to stay here. She walked through all the rooms in the house and left without saying anything to Dave. Now Fern feels in her native element again. Only nature and freedom give her a feeling of complete peace of mind. Fern got a job at Amazon's sorting facility again to earn some money. She celebrated the new year alone, but it didn't bother her at all. Soon Fern returned to the nomad camp and learned that Swanky had passed away. All the nomads paid tribute to her memory. The next day, Fern spoke heart to heart with Bob. The woman never had children. She also admitted that she missed her father, who had been gone for a long time. Bob in turn told her about his son, who would have turned 33 today. 5 years ago he voluntarily departed from life. Even after all this time, it is difficult for Bob to talk about it. He feels guilty for not saving his own son. Finally, Fern decided to return to the city where she lived with her husband. She made a decision to get rid of all the things that had been stored in her old friend's warehouse all this time. Fern also visited the abandoned factory where she used to work. She couldn't hold back her tears. After that, Fern came to her old house. It was here that she lived with her husband for many years. It was the happiest time in her life. In the final scenes, we see Fern setting out on